In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to solve quadratic equations with a coefficient other than 1. You can pause the slide right here and read everything that's written, but I'm going to skip to the red part. You basically multiply the first term and the last term, which will be the quadratic and the constant. Two numbers have to multiply to give you that product. The same two numbers have to add together to give you the middle or linear term. The more you do this and get comfortable with it, the more often you can just guess and check. In higher math classes, you will more often than not use guess and check, but you'll start here. And I'll show you both methods. So again, you can pause this if you want to read it. So in this first problem, I'm going to show you both ways. No matter which way you do it, you have to factor out the greatest common factor first, if there is one. So in this problem, 6y squared plus 22y minus 8, the greatest common factor would be 2 because each of those numbers can be divided by 2. So I'm going to do that. So this is what this looks like. I'm going to factor out a 2. And when I do that, basically I'm dividing each of these things. So I ask myself, what do I need to multiply to 2 to get 6y squared? What do I need to multiply to 2 to get 6y squared? I need a 3 and I need a y squared. Then what do I need to multiply to 2? Because that was my greatest common factor, right? 2 to get 22y. I need an 11y because 2 times 11y would give me 22y. And what do I need to multiply to 2 to get negative 8? I need a negative 4. So that's the first thing, and that you can see factoring is the exact opposite of the distributive property. All right, now is when we have to start using the process that I'm talking about. All right, so what you do, this is different from the last section because we did not have a quadratic term in front. So that means that in the beginning, our leading coefficient was always 1, and now we have a 3 there. And you're asking, what do I do with this 2? The 2 that we factored out in the beginning just kind of stays there and out of the way. All right. So what you do from this point on is I'm going to put a double set of parentheses. And now I'm going to say the quadratic term times the linear term. Okay, so that would give me 3 times negative 4. That gives me a negative 12. Okay, so I say what times what gives me that negative 12. That adds together to give you the middle term, which is 11. So what times what gives me negative 12 that adds together to give me negative 11? Well, that would be a negative 1 and a positive 12. So negative 1 and a positive 12. So look, negative 1 times 12 gives me negative 1. And negative 1 plus 12 would give me 11. So what I'm going to do with that, instead of putting them like we did in the last section, okay, I'm going to split this up, and I'm just going to I'm going to write this right here. So 3y squared, and then I'm going to take this negative 1 and go negative 1y. And the 12, I'm going to put right here and go plus 12y and minus 4. So I know this can be really confusing, but basically what I'm doing is I'm replacing the 11y with negative 1y plus 12y. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take out anything that I can from this first set of parentheses. So what can I take out? Well, they both have a y. If I do that, I'm left with 3y minus 1. All right, so y times what gives me 3y squared? 3y. Y times what gives me negative 1y? Negative 1. All right, then we work on the second set of parentheses. So in this set of parentheses, what can I take out of 12y and 4? What number? My greatest common factor would be a 3. When I do that, that would be a 4. I can take out a 4. When I do that, I would be left with 3y minus 1. Now, I hope what you can see here is that this parentheses and this parentheses are the same exact thing, which is what you want. So I'm going to write that, what's in the parentheses, in the first parentheses here, and then everything that's left. So this y plus 4 are my outside numbers. I'm going to write right here. And that is my final answer. It's completely factored, and there's nothing else you can do. You can always check it by multiplying again, and you would get the thing that you started with. Now, I'm going to take that same exact problem, and I'm going to show you guess and check. Okay, so this first way that we did it is the proper way in math to do it. When you get more experience, you'll do guess and check, and everybody likes that a whole lot more. All right, so let me show you so you can see what I'm talking about. Again, you would take out the greatest common factor, which is 2, and you would be left with the same thing that we were in the original problem. Well, not in the original problem, but over here. Okay, now I want to ask myself, what times what gives me that? What times what gives me 3y squared? Well, 3y and y gives me that. Okay, now what times what gives me 4? Well, 2 and 2 could give me 4, or 4 and 1 could give me 4. So I am going to put a positive 4 and a negative 1. I'm just going to try that. This is why it's called guess and check, because you really don't know unless you have a lot of experience or until you check it, which is what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to check this. You're asking probably, well, what about the 11y? Watch. If I multiply these two numbers, I would get negative 1y. If I multiply these two numbers, I would get 12y. If I add those two together, I would get 11y, which means that this is my answer because this number right here matches my linear term. And you can see that this answer that I got in the second problem matches what I got in the first problem. In this problem, it's an equation. We're not just factoring, we're solving. All right, so the very first thing that you want to do in any of these problems is get one side to equal 0. So I'm going to do that by subtracting the 8x from both sides. So when I do, I would get 3x squared minus 8x plus 5 equals 0. Okay, now I'm going to work this out the same way that I did in the other problem, the first way. All right, so I'm going to say what times what gives me 3 times 5, which is 15. So what times what gives me 15 that adds to give me a negative 8? Well, negative 3 and negative 5 would multiply to give negative 15 and add to give me negative 8. So I'm going to switch out this negative 8x right here with the negative 3 and the negative 5. So you can see that I've just replaced that. I've substituted it. Okay, now I'm going to break this in half with parentheses, just like this. Break it in half. So what can I factor out of this first set of parentheses? What do they both have? Well, they both have a 3 and an x. What would be left if I factored out a 3x? I would have x and then minus 1, because 3x times negative 1 is going to give me that negative 3x. In the second set of parentheses, what can I factor out? Well, I can factor out a negative 5. I know that I could factor out a positive 5 also, but I really don't want to keep that negative sign right there. Okay? So what do I multiply by negative 5 to get negative 5x? Well, an x. What do I need to multiply to negative 5 to get a positive 5? A negative 1. And as you can see, like I said in that first problem, these parentheses match, which is what you want. So I'm going to put what matches in one set of parentheses, and then I'm going to put what's left on the outside, which is the 3x minus 5. It does not matter which order you put those parentheses in. Now, if I was just factoring it, I would be done, but since I'm solving it, I set each of these equal to that 0 right there, and I solve for the x. So I'm going to add 1. I get x equals 1 right here. And I would add the 5 and divide the 3, and I would get x equals 5 over 3. Both of these are my answers. I'm going to do that same problem again, but with guess and check. Okay, so again, you need one side to equal 0, so I'm going to subtract that 8x from both sides. Now, what times what gives me 3x squared? 3x and x. You always want to split your x's up. And then what times what gives me 5? Well, 1 and 5. And I need this to be a positive 5, but I need that to be a negative 8. So both of my signs are going to be negative because, watch, okay, now we're going to check it. So I know that 3x right here, this 3x times x is going to give me 3x squared. And I know that negative 5 times negative 1 is going to give me positive 5. So all I have to worry about is the 8x in the middle. So that would give me a negative 5x, and this would give me a negative 3x. And if I add those up, that gives me a negative 8x, so that works. So again, now you just set both parentheses equal to 0. Sorry, I skipped a step. And you work it out the same way we did on the other side. So I'm going to do it a little faster because we already know what the answers are. And you can see that those are the same things. Since we've done a few problems with guess and check, I'm just going to do it the initial math way, I guess, to save time. And then in class, we can practice with guess and check if you'd like. So in this problem, there is no greatest common factor. So I'm just going to start off by multiplying my quadratic term, which is the 5, and my linear term, which is the negative 6. So 5 times negative 6 is negative 30. So what times what gives me negative 30? That adds together to give me 13. Well, 15 and negative 2. So 15 times negative 2 gives me negative 30, and 15 plus negative 2 gives me 13. So I am going to rewrite this, but replace the 13x with the 15x and negative 2x, because it's the same thing. 13x is 15x minus 2x. So now anytime you're dealing with a quadratic term, you factor by grouping. So that's what I'm going to do. Which is basically you split it in half. Okay. So I can factor out what from the first parentheses? What is my greatest common factor? Well, I have a 5 that I can factor out, and both of those have an x, so I can factor out 1x. So what do I need to multiply to 5x to get 5x squared? X. What do I need to multiply to 5x to get 15x? 3. Okay, what can I factor out of the second set of parentheses? Well, if this number is negative, you always want this to be a negative. So I want to factor out a negative 2. What do I need to multiply to negative 2 to get negative 2x? X. What do I need to multiply to negative 2 to get negative 6? A positive 3. And you'll see that these match each other. So I'm going to put what's in the parentheses together and what's outside of the parentheses together. And that's your answer. And again, if you ever want to check yourself and make sure you're right, then just multiply that together. Okay, now in this problem, I'm going to factor using guess and check. So I'm not going to do both methods. I'm just going to use guess and check. So you ask yourself, what times what gives you 3x squared? 3x and x. What times what gives you negative 3? Well, 1 and 3. One of those needs to be negative. So, and again, this is guess and check. So if you check it and you don't get it right, change your numbers around, change your signs around, whatever you need to do to get the right answer, because you will get it. It's just, you might have to guess and check more at first until you get kind of used to it. So when I do this, I know that 3x times x is going to give me 3x squared. I know that 1 times negative 3 is going to give me negative 3. So the only thing that I need to check is this negative 8x. So These numbers, the two inside numbers, would multiply to give me 1x. The two outside numbers would multiply to give me negative 9x. And if I add those two together, I would get negative 8x, which works. So this is my answer. That's it. In this last problem, I'm going to solve using guess and check. So what do you have to do? Well, one side is already set equal to 0. So then you look for your greatest common factor. Well, there's no greatest common factor other than 1 in this case. But I do want to show you something. Anytime you have a negative quadratic term, you don't have to, but I highly suggest that you factor out a negative. It just makes the problem a whole lot easier, I think. Okay, so if this was something that I was doing, which I am, so I'm going to factor out a negative 1, which would basically change all my signs. So I get 3x squared minus 5x minus 12 equals 0. Okay, so what do you do with that negative 1? Well, I want to get the problem all by itself. So if I divide both sides by negative 1, that's going to cancel out, right? And 0 divided by negative 1 is just 0. So then it just becomes a whole lot easier, I think. Now, obviously, when you get more experience, you can skip from the first step to the third step, but for right now, I'm showing every step. Okay. Now, what do you need to multiply to give you 3x squared? Well, you need a 3x and an x. What times what gives you 12? Well, there's a lot of things. There's 1 and 12. There's 2 and 6. There's 3 and 4. Now, I know from experience that it's going to be that, okay? And I will tell you, this is just a little tip. Most of the time, not all the time, it's definitely not a rule, but typically, you're going to use the factors that are closer together. So like I said, with 12, you've got 1 and 12, you've got 2 and 6, and you got 3 and 4. Typically, they're going to use the ones that are closer together. That's definitely not a rule, but, it helps. So let's check this, okay? So we know that 3x times x is 3x squared. We know that 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. So we're checking this negative 5x. So we have 4x, and 3x times negative 3 is negative 9x. So those add together to give me negative 5x. So that works, okay? This is not my final answer. So I'm going to take those over to the side. It is factored. It's just not solved. And I'm going to set those equal to 0 individually. And I'm going to solve for x. So I've got negative 4. 3x equals negative 4. Divide by 3, I get x equals negative 4/3. And I'm going to add 3 to both sides on this one, and I would get x equals 3. So 3 and negative 4/3 are both of my answers.